Welcome to The Tech Life with Rich Conte, bringing you stories from the front lines of the tech industry and the insider's perspective on starting, growing, or thriving in a technology venture.
Welcome to another episode of Silicon Harbor Radio, brought to you by the Tech Life podcast and Silicon Harbor Magazine. I'm your host, Rich Conte. Each episode, we take you inside Charleston's rapidly growing tech and startup community and give a voice to the local entrepreneurs and other contributors driving that growth. Last episode, we welcomed Baird Hall back to the podcast. Baird is co-founder of Charleston technology startup Wave, and he shared the experience of shepherding Wave through a significant pivot in order to find a profitable revenue model for the venture. We also talked about the podcast industry, where Wave has found a substantial market for its platform. Baird commented on how podcasters are craving new tools as the industry grows and changes at a rapid pace. Well, as luck would have it, this episode provides further evidence of the demand for technology in the podcast industry. We're fortunate to feature another technology startup serving that market that has recently established a presence here in Charleston. Our guest on this episode of Silicon Harbor Radio, brought to you by the Tech Live podcast and Silicon Harbor Magazine, is Dave Hanley. Dave is Vice President of Business Development for Advertisecast. Well, welcome to the show, Dave.
Hey, Rich. Thanks so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Dave, can you start by telling listeners a little about Advertisecast, your mission, the services you provide, and who your users and customers are?
Yeah, absolutely, Rich. So essentially, Advertisecast has two customers, you could say. One is podcasters, and the other customer we have are brands and agencies. So essentially what we do is we help podcasters monetize their content on one hand, and on the other hand, we help brands and agencies tap into those very loyal, very engaged audiences that podcasts have in terms of promoting their products and services and really driving their brands.
What's the origin story behind Advertisecast? How did the idea originate, and what was the journey to bring it to market like?
Yeah, so it really originated, to be honest, out of a kind of a passion project. So my founding partner, Trevor Smithlin, he, like me, is a big podcast fan. We both listen to a ton of podcasts. You know, when we sit down for dinner, we're always comparing what the latest great show that we discovered is. And we kind of both had the same epiphany that this is a growing space, and it's been really, really effective for marketers early on. Even though, you know, podcasting itself is 15 years into the game, marketers are really just starting to get into the podcast medium, you know, over the last several years. And we see it as a really, really phenomenal growth area. And we're both passionate about podcasts. So that kind of led us to really building this business. And today, our main focus is really bringing more brands into the space that haven't yet experienced podcast medium in terms of driving new customers, driving awareness for their brand. And that's kind of our focus today.
What has surprised you to learn about how advertisers approach podcasting as an advertising medium?
Yeah, what's been interesting, Rich, is that some advertisers and agencies are kind of painting podcasts with the same brush as, say, traditional radio, but they've been surprised to learn that it's actually quite a bit different, primarily due to the nature of both the delivery of the ad. So oftentimes it's a post-delivered type of very organic placement, which is a little bit different from radio. And it's actually kind of like old school radio, you know, years and years ago, where the hosts would actually deliver the advertisements. And the other thing that's really surprised us is the fact that even though it's becoming mainstream, it is still very new for a lot of companies that are looking for different advertising mediums. And we've found that there's a lot of education involved in terms of teaching people the ins and outs of how to effectively run a podcast advertising campaign. So the educational aspect has been something for sure that we've spent quite a bit of time and effort on.
How about on the podcaster side of the equation? What are some of the things that make a podcast more or less appealing to advertisers?
Yeah, it's interesting when you start to think about things from the podcaster side of things. What you'll see out there is there's all different types of podcasters. Some are doing it as a hobby. Some are doing it, frankly, as almost their full-time job. There's shows with hundreds of listeners and shows with millions of listeners. And the one thing that really, really is important for a podcaster to understand when they're actually looking to monetize their content is that what they're actually selling to an advertiser is not necessarily their show or their content. It's their audience. So really understanding who your audience is and kind of bundling that in a way which is interesting and compelling to an advertiser, I think is the key thing for a show to understand. The other thing which is also really important to focus on is what other added value can you provide in addition to, say, the ads that you're going to be running for an advertiser. So for example, can you utilize your social media to actually add some additional fuel to that fire for your advertiser? Because anything that you can do to go above and beyond to really make that advertiser extremely pleased with how you've worked with them will obviously go a long way in building a long-term relationship.
What are some of the challenges or obstacles that Advertisecast has had to overcome to successfully connect podcasters with advertisers?
I would say there's kind of two challenges. One I already mentioned, which is the educational aspect. So, we get a lot of very sophisticated marketers and agencies really asking us about the basics of the space because it is relatively new and they haven't done it before. So the educational aspect is definitely a challenge for us. And we've kind of taken it upon ourselves to say, hey, we're in this space. It's new. It's just part of our job to educate folks, and we have no problem with that at all. The other thing that's been a little bit of a challenge is when you think about advertising, there's typically a set budget, and that budget typically falls into, a number of buckets. And where we're pulling from in terms of advertising on podcasts isn't necessarily coming from a podcast bucket unless it's a company that's already in the space. So a lot of times we have the discussion of, hey, where does this come from? Is it from traditional radio? Is it from digital media? Or is it from some other place that we're just going to pluck that from and put it into the podcast bucket? So that's definitely, a challenge that we've come up against, just the old budgeting challenge.
We'll return to our talk with Dave shortly. But first, I want to take a minute to talk about a great product that has transformed my travel experience for the better, the Away Carry-On. My old beat-up hardshell carry-on had reached an inglorious end to its lifespan, and I gladly replaced it with a brand new, lightweight, durable, and great-looking Away Carry-On. Its well-designed interior with convenient compartments and enclosures make packing a breeze. The big surprise, though, was the convenient built-in USB charger. You can charge your iPhone up to 5 times on a single charge directly from your Away Carry-On. But don't just take my word for it. Try the Away Carry-On for yourself. They feature a 100-day trial. Live with it, travel with it, Instagram it. If at any point you decide it's not for you, return it for a full refund, no questions asked. Get $20 off a suitcase by visiting awaytravel.com/techlife and entering promo code TechLife on checkout. Plus, they offer free shipping on any order within the lower 48 states. The holidays are almost here, and Away bags and accessories make the perfect gift with their lifetime guarantee and 100-day trial. So there's a perfect size and color for everyone on your list this holiday season. Or grab an Away gift card if you can't make up your mind. Choose from over 10 colors and 5 sizes. The carry-on, the bigger carry-on, the medium, the large for extended stays, or the kids carry-on for the smaller travelers among us. Add on some Away packing cubes or a garment sleeve to complete your travel kit, or personalize your suitcase with our premium leather stickers. If that's not enough, they offer a lifetime warranty. If anything breaks, they will fix or replace it for you for life. So get $20 off a suitcase by heading over to awaytravel.com/techlife and entering promo code TechLife on checkout. What are some of the big opportunities in the space on the horizon for Advertisecast?
Yeah, what we see as some opportunities, Rich, are really around just in general the growth of this medium. Avid podcast listenership is going up around 25% a year. At the same time, the ad spend is accelerating quite rapidly in the space. And also there's a lot more data coming out. So up until this point, you can't get a ton of data around listening behaviors and habits and who's listening to various shows. More and more of that's coming. So that's going to be able to shed some more light and open some new opportunities in terms of demographic type of targeting, geo-targeting, and things like that. The other thing that we really see as an opportunity, and we've been leveraging this kind of from day one, is that traditionally advertisers are coming into the podcast space really interested in the very large shows. As you can imagine, you're on the comedy side, say like a Joe Rogan, or on the business side, like a Tim Ferriss or something like that. But what we've seen is a pretty interesting phenomenon, which is enabled by our technology platform, which actually makes it very easy to work with many, many smaller shows all at once. So for example, it takes just as much time on our platform to do a campaign with one podcast, say a large one, as it would to do a campaign with 20 smaller podcasts that might only have several hundred or several thousand listeners. But what we found by doing some of these bulk buys is that it actually is very, very effective on those smaller shows. So what we found is that those audiences are very engaged. Typically, they're listening to every episode of that show and they have that special bond with the host. So we started to leverage that more and more for several of our advertising clients, and we've seen some great results.
You mentioned your co-founding partner earlier in the discussion. Who are some of the other members of the Advertisecast team?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, Trevor Smithlin, he's essentially the original founder of the business before I partnered up with him. He actually is based with our technical team in Wisconsin. And then in our Charleston location here, I've also got a fellow named Garrett who works with me on the business development side. But today the company is fairly small and we're growing pretty rapidly. So we're looking forward to potentially bringing on some more talent in the near future as well.
Can you share a little bit about your background and what led you to Advertisecast?
Yeah, it's been a little bit of a change in career for myself. So over the past 14 years or so, I've spent my whole career in enterprise software, specifically in the insurance industry, essentially co-founding and growing two businesses in the enterprise software space. Last December, I exited my second company called Risk Control Technologies to my other partners. And I decided at that point I was wanting to do something different. Took some time off. I actually spent the winter in Charleston last January through March and listening to a ton of podcasts, both from a educational self-improvement perspective as well as just for pleasure, and started to really think about the opportunity in the space. And that's when I actually reached out and met Trevor, and we kind of formulated a relationship to build the business here.
You recently relocated to the Charleston area. What prompted the move for you?
Well, I would say today being almost December and the weather poking above 70 certainly helped. As I mentioned, I'm originally from the Toronto area. Toronto is a much different way of life. I mean, in the city alone, there's 3 million people. In the greater Toronto area, it's coming up towards 6 million. In my previous roles in those two businesses that I mentioned earlier, I traveled all over the United States. I think I visited 45 states in about 14 years of business travel, and came to Charleston a couple times and was just really impressed with just the city in general, the people. And then when I started to dig in and found that it was also an up and coming technology hub with a lot of talent and a pretty promising future, it became really, really compelling to think of it as our new home. And we're pretty happy to have relocated here over the last couple of weeks.
What are your perceptions of the Charleston area, both in general and in terms of our entrepreneur and tech communities?
I mean, obviously, it's a beautiful city. The people are super nice here. We found that to be really great, really easy to meet people. From an entrepreneur perspective, my perception is there's a lot of scrappy, bootstrap type entrepreneurs here, which is kind of the world that I come from. In my previous companies, we never raised any outside capital. So because this is a still developing ecosystem in terms of entrepreneurship, I feel like people are having to bootstrap and get the job done without having unlimited resources, which I really like. And I think that builds a really strong business, even if it's not accelerated by a bunch of outside equity. I think it's a really interesting environment right now.
What are some of the local tech or industry activities you've had the opportunity to engage with so far?
Day to day, we're actually located in the Charleston Digital Corridor flagship building. So that's great to be kind of right in the thick of things. As well, I attended Dig South earlier this year, which was a great event. Plan to do that again next year. And right now, just checking out a couple of the other local events and trying to get involved as much as we can here.
Well, where can listeners go to learn more about Advertisecast and to keep up with your progress?
You can check us out on our website, which is advertisecast.com. You can also email me directly at dave@advertisecast.com. And if anybody locally here is ever in the flagship building, our office is directly across from Ernest's office. So it's really convenient to find when you walk in the front door there. Knock on the window and say hi.
Dave Hanley, Vice President, Business Development for Advertisecast. Well, thank you for joining us today, Dave.
Thanks so much, Rich.
I encourage local listeners to reach out to Dave or look for him at local events and welcome him to Charleston. Advertisecast is yet another great addition to our local technology and entrepreneur community. It's starting to seem like an almost weekly occurrence that I meet or hear about another entrepreneur setting their sights on Charleston. The influx of new energy, ideas, and experiences is great for the health of the community. Our partners at Silicon Harbor Magazine are a great resource for keeping up with all of the events and news in the Charleston technology, creative, and entrepreneur community. Visit them at siliconharbormag.com and follow them on Twitter at siliconhbrmag. You can follow us at TechLifePod and also find us on Facebook. The best way to keep up with the show is to subscribe. For iTunes, visit www.siliconharborradio.com or search for Tech Life with Rich Conte or Silicon Harbor Radio. If you enjoyed the show, let us know by leaving us a rating and a review. Subscribing via RSS is as simple as visiting techlife.libsyn.com/RSS. It seems like we're barreling towards the holidays and the end of the year, but we have another episode or two on our slate before 2018 gets here. Also, stay on the lookout for our year-end countdown of the top 10 episodes of 2017 between Christmas and New Year's. 2017 has been an amazing year, as we've been blessed with a schedule full of great guests and the audience continues to grow. We set new monthly download records in September, October, and November. In November, we almost reached 20,000 total downloads, and December is already on pace to eclipse 25,000. That's all the time we have on this episode of Silicon Harbor Radio, brought to you by the Tech Life Podcast and Silicon Harbor Magazine. I'm your host, Rich Conte, and thanks for listening.